Yeah, he got me pretty good at the wedding, so I could go after him right now, but I'm not going to. For a real treat tonight. This is my uncle Brandon Pressnell. He's been a minister in the kingdom for a long, long time. I think, did you start off at university in Montgomery? That was the church there on campus at Faulkner University, and he was there youth minister, I believe. And then he went to Coleman Church of Christ and was youth minister there for several years. And he's been at Madison for 21, was that right? 21 years as various minister, youth minister, and then I think family minister and several things like that. And now he is got a promotion to the. I'm just kidding, but he's now as the pulpit minister, one of the pulpit ministers at Madison Church of Christ. So he's one of the best speakers and dudes I know. So y'all are in for a real treat.
Annabeth invited us over tonight for dinner, and I don't know if that was the first time she'd ever had people over, but man, what an all-star she is. That was fantastic. In fact, there was so much food that I tried to do like small portions and put just a little bit of everything on my plate, and I still feel like I'm swollen up here. But man, I really appreciate them having us over. Cade, as you guys know, is a little bit of a doofus. I mean, I had to. One more shot, right? Yeah. But in all seriousness, you know how it is with family. You love each other so much, and you appreciate what you're watching as someone grows. And Cade was such a good boy growing up. I mean, he was such an influence on our children. And just they couldn't wait to be with family because they knew Cade would be there. And that's the truth. And when they all got taller than him, it was really, really fun. I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. I can't help myself. I'm sorry, man. He knows I love him. All right. We're going to talk a little bit tonight about the winds, the rains, and the floods in turbulent times. Now, I don't want to use COVID, and I don't want to use coronavirus as the backdrop of everything that we do, but I think this is such a timely conversation to have because we have all been through some really weird times as of late. I mean, this past year and a half or so has caused all kinds of disruptions. It's made life just really difficult. I mean, I still find myself sometimes walking into restaurants and going, man, where's my mask? And, you know, I'm putting that thing on. We don't have to wear masks in the Madison area anymore. You know, we don't have to do that. But for a long time, it was kind of like, hey, when you walked in the door, people go, you need to wear a mask, or, you know, and that was just such a weird dynamic. I'd never lived like that before. And I don't know if it's how I was brought up, but I guess with my parents, and they're great parents, by the way. Nikki and Debbie Pressnell are just, I don't know. I don't have an excuse. You know what I mean? Like some people may say, I've got all these issues and challenges. Man, I don't have that. I had great parents who loved each other, supported each other. Yeah, they fought from time to time, and that was pretty fun to watch. But they had such a strong and powerful marriage. And as a result, I don't think we had that instability at home, you know, because everything was so smooth and so wonderful. And I think that really helped us navigate challenges in life. So I never was motivated by fear. When storms came, I wouldn't think about those things. I wouldn't worry about anything. I don't know. I think that stability in the home really did make a huge difference in our lives. And so I'm thankful for that. And this past year, you know, a lot of things were taken away from us. I mean, stuff was shut down, and we'd never imagined that would ever happen. And it caused us to all react certain ways, okay? And some of us reacted well, and some of us pitched fits. Maybe both of us pitched fits. I don't know. It seems like we got really polarized in our nation. It seemed like, as a result of the issue, it fell on one side or the other. There was no common ground. There was no conversation. There was no dialogue. And as a result, I think we saw kind of the ugly in everybody during this past year, and it caused all of us to pull back from people and not have relationships with them. And I think, you know, if there's ever been an illustration of something, forget about the virus, but the dynamics of the way we interact with each other really, I think, challenged us even within the church. We came to different places at different times sometimes. And even in the midst of all these people that we love, we found ourselves looking across the room going, can you believe what they posted on Facebook? Did you see that? I wanted to respond, but I didn't. We got into that kind of mentality. And I think such things like that are what I believe Jesus is talking about when he speaks to us in the Sermon on the Mount. Now, you guys know we've sung this song our entire lives. Wise man built his house upon the rock. Foolish man built his house upon the sand. When the rains came, splat, the one who didn't have the foundation, who was built on the sand, it just destroyed the house. But I think maybe we have oversimplified that a little bit, that song. We make it sound so, just a happy song. But really, I think Jesus is trying to challenge us to think about things differently. I want to take you just for a moment to the Sermon on the Mount. And I want to kind of set the stage for it, because really this passage about the winds and the rains and the floods is the conclusion part of the Sermon on the Mount. And so you really have to find some context in here. And you guys know in this time, the Jews, and the Pharisees specifically, made things so just challenging. Over the time, being known as God's children, God's chosen nation, during that time, you began to adopt your own identity. Like, we're sort of the special, we're the favorite son. We're all these things. And I think the nation of Israel had gotten so used to calling themselves God's people because God had made promises to Abraham that he would fulfill through their nation. But I think they took on some ownership there that wasn't theirs to take. And I think they got so caught up in, we have the law of Moses. It's what God's will is. He gave it directly to us. We live by it, and therefore we are blessed by it. And they had a lot of problem with that. If you go back and look at their history, it was a series of them doing great things, God blessing them turning their backs on God because they were comfortable, him sending prophets to warn them rejecting the prophets, then him striking down their nation by sending in other nations to come in, whether take them captivity or whether it was just to punish them and cause a great slaughter. And over, when they would hit that bottom, they would once again call out to God. He would hear their cries, bring them back up to greatness. And then that pattern just repeated over and over in the Old Testament. But still, God was in control, and they were God's people. So when you get that framework in the background, and you really start thinking about the relationship that the Pharisees specifically had over Judaism, they were sort of controllers of the law, right? They were the ones who basically said, this is how you achieve righteousness. You follow the law exactly. And even though none of them could, in fact, the Bible says that if they didn't follow the law exactly, they were guilty of all of it. They were still having to offer up sacrifices for their sins. But still, they had this idea that somehow we can do enough, we can do enough righteous deeds, and that equates righteousness. And it's because of what we've done. And I think that is a bizarre way to think about things, because that's really not what God was trying to say. God was trying to teach them obedience, but instead they made it out about their own righteousness, not God's righteousness. And so with that in the background, anything that sounded different than that would have been something that would have been looked down upon. Okay? It would have been called blasphemy. It would have been something that they wanted to take care of in a forceful way and rid it out of their camp. Okay? Again, because if stuff crept in and God left them, then they would be in bad shape again. So they were quick to rid that stuff. So Jesus arrives on the scene, and it's not like he just shows up at the Sermon on the Mount. I mean, he's lived among them. He's seen how they act. He's watched their behavior. And he steps onto the scene. And in Matthew chapter 5, I want you to get this. When he settles down to speak, and this is Jesus kind of presenting, what we have as far as a record. Maybe not the first thing he said, but it's the first time that we see like a full-length sermon. And he opens his mouth and he says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven." Now, if you're a Jew, that kingdom word is something pretty powerful. Now, when you look into the original language, that kingdom is talking about the spiritual power and dominion, not a physical kingdom. So Jesus is saying to them, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. They're going to enjoy my reign, my power. Now, you can imagine what that did to the Jews. They were absolutely frustrated by this. To hear him speak in terms of anything kingdom and to assign himself that, he's saying, this is my dominion. If you want to be a part of this, you are poor in spirit. Now, again, going back to the old law, it was a series of thou shalt not, right? It was a lot of rules for them to follow. I mean, when you go into Leviticus and you read everything that they had to do, I mean, it is oppressive to think about how much they had to do to be obedient. And Jesus comes on the scene, and you would think, as the Son of God, the one who had given the law of Moses, that you would think that he would utter those same exact principles over and over. But I think as black and white as those laws were, Jesus was coming in not to make them more murky. He was coming in to up the requirement. He was actually taking the rule and going straight to the heart of the rule and saying and insisting on all of us to understand what the purpose of it is. See, the ritualistic obedience that they had gotten used to was, good for obedience. But if their hearts were far from God, it didn't make much sense. In fact, doesn't Jesus say to some of the Pharisees, he says, these people, they honor me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. And he said that in condemning tones. So that's an interesting thing to me. It's not that Jesus came to destroy the law. In fact, he said, I did not come to destroy the law, but I came to fulfill the law. And then when he's asked what the greatest commands is, he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind. Love your neighbor as yourself. For on these two things hang all the law and the prophets. So Jesus didn't come to do away with that. He just came to help us understand the why. So he gives them a choice. You're going to be blessed if you're poor in spirit. And you're going to have the kingdom of heaven. If you're meek, you're going to inherit the earth. If you're a peacemaker, you're going to be called a son of God. And so the Sermon on the Mount is sort of revolutionary, not because it gives them new content, but because it reveals really the purpose behind everything. Everything that Jesus is saying is to open their eyes to how you need to develop a deeper faith and trust in God. Okay? It wasn't so much about the following every rule perfectly. None of us are able to do that, and the law proved that. It's so that we might have a deeper faith in him. Okay? And so when he goes through the Sermon on the Mount, he talks about a lot of things. And in fact, you'll see it over and over. He says, you have heard that it was said. And then he'll quote the Old Testament law. You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment. Then he says, but I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Do you understand what he's saying? It's not so much the act of the killing, it's the anger in the heart that disrupts who you are. He goes on to say, you have heard that it was said, you shall not commit adultery. But I say, don't even look at a woman to lust after her in your heart. He says, he was also saying, whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorcement. But I say to you that everyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of sexual immorality, makes her commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery. He's taking the concept and he's digging it straight into the heart to remind us. So this whole chapter, or this whole sermon in Matthew chapter 5, 6, and 7, is Jesus taking the principles that we know are true, and he's trying to insinuate that there's a heart aspect of it and compel us to really think deeper. It's not so much just the activity, but it's what's going on inside of us. So when you get over to Matthew chapter 6 and 7, and I won't get into all this, but he gives so many great practical lessons about how to live our lives effectively for him. And he shows us the idea of giving our all and our fullness to God. But when you get down to chapter 7, he talks about not being judgmental. He talks about asking and receiving. And he finally gets to the conclusion in Matthew chapter 7, and that's where we start tonight. So I'm going to start in verse 21, and then we'll read the text for tonight. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven. again, going back to this, like the idea that if I just call on God, if I just call on Him, that in and of itself tells everybody in the room that I believe and trust in God. But Jesus is saying it's deeper than that. You can't just say, hey, I trust in God, and then not do what He says. You have to do what He says. So, if we don't do what He says, it says, I will declare to them, this is verse 23, I never knew you. Depart from me, you workers of lawlessness. And then after that, we get to, the wise man built his house upon the rock. Are you catching the difference in the tone that we've made it? I mean, Jesus has given them a lot to think about, a lot to transition their minds away from that old way of thinking to a newer way that compels the heart to really be devoted to God. And He says this. He said, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. Again, all of these hard things that He's just said to them. If we do those things, you're like a man who builds his house on the rock. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat upon that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell, and the floods came, and the winds blew and beat against that house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. So when Jesus finished this saying, it says they were blown away at what they had just heard. I would imagine that the principles that they knew before were all of a sudden coming to life, like, oh, wow. And in fact, when I think about the Apostle Paul, when he was converted on the road to Damascus, you guys remember this, right? Bright light shines. He goes into the city to wait. And Ananias comes and says, and why are you waiting? Arise and be baptized and call on the name of the Lord. And so Saul does that. We know he becomes the Apostle Paul, and he's out there. And it's amazing to me because if you will look at it, Paul immediately changed his direction. And I want you to understand something. I don't necessarily believe that Paul had dumped all of his Jewish heritage for the sake of Christianity. I believe what Paul was saying was, now all of this stuff makes sense on a spiritual level. Like all that I went through, all that I learned, everything that I went and sat at the feet of Gamaliel, all the things that I learned when I was going to school and training and becoming a Pharisee and becoming a keeper of the law and an expert of the law, all of a sudden these things that Jesus said and that His apostles are teaching make sense on a spiritual level. I'm making the connection to, it's not just about following the rules. It's about that relationship with God that needs to happen because I'm submitting myself to Him and trusting in Him. So Jesus says in this conclusion, people who are wise will listen to these words and put them into practice. And what's going to happen is they're going to build this foundation that is so rock solid that when turbulent times come their way, they can handle it. They're strong enough to withstand the winds and the floods and the rains. All right? But if you don't listen to what I'm saying, and if you keep doing the stuff you've been doing, if you don't change your heart and really believe with all you got in what I'm saying and put those things into practice, it's going to be like building your house on the sand. And when the winds and the waves come, they're going to crash up against that house and they're going to wipe it clean. That's what He's saying here. So while we sing that children's song, and it is a positive, and the kids love it and it brings excitement and we all slap our hands together when that house crashes, Jesus meant that to be a warning to us and to remind us that we need to be developing a faith that is based on the things that He's taught us. And that makes us strong in our faith. So He's saying ultimately that when it really rolls out, we're all going to have some tests. We're all going to have some trials. We're going to have some difficulties in life. And when those turbulent times come, we need to be strong enough to be able to withstand that. So let's talk just a moment about winds. I don't know how you feel about winds. I remember, going golfing when I was a kid, and the wind was just whipping across the golf course. And, I'm not a good golfer anyway, so anything that you do with the wind is an exaggeration. So if you hit the ball down the middle of the fairway and it's going to slice to the right and the wind's blowing that way, oh, man, it just take that thing. You just ruin it, just absolutely wreck it. So I think about winds. That's what I think about. I think about being in the middle of, out in the field somewhere where they get one of those little dirt devils or whatever, dust devils, and they're spinning around you, and it's blowing all over the place, and you don't know where it came from, and then all of a sudden it disappears. So I think about that with regard to winds, the winds of change. Okay, now I want us to kind of capture this from a spiritual perspective. The winds of change, the misdirection, the unexpected, the disruption. I would say that this past year was kind of that, wasn't it? No one really saw that coming. I mean, I remember back in, I guess, February of 2020, I got really sick with something. And I was certain it was the flu, went to the doctor. They said, you don't have flu, you have a sinus infection. And being a man who lives in North Alabama, I can manufacture a sinus infection just like that. I knew it wasn't that. And I said, I'm sure it's flu. That's how I felt. And they said, nope, it's not flu. So you just go home and take some allergy meds, and maybe that'll help you. Well, I don't know that I had COVID. I never got tested for it. But I do know that that was a miserable thing. And it changed everything when it came in. Unexpected disruptions. So I want to talk to us a little bit about what we need to do in these times. So in John chapter 14, verse 6 and 7, ultimately, when winds come and they change things, and your world is kind of upended for a little bit, and and I also think of, in terms of this, the way people think. In the middle of all this stuff, we had like a crazy election cycle. We had all these fanatical groups in different areas really pushing, and we had some terrible situations happen with people being killed. And all that just really kind of accentuated all this stuff. And through that, a lot of changes took place, and we had to react and respond to those things. And so in John chapter 14, verses 6 and 7, I think one of the things that we need to be reminded of is that there is a truth, and that no matter what is changing around us, that we can lean upon what God says. So John chapter 14, 6 and 7, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except by me. So if we stay focused on what Jesus has to say, we're going to find ourselves in the right spot. Jesus himself said about the truth, he was praying to God in John 17, and he says to him, sanctify them, talking about all of my people, sanctify them in your truth, for your word is truth. And then I think about these passages in Psalm 119, verse 11. It says, your word I have treasured in my heart, that I might not sin against you. And then later in verse 105, it says, your word is a lamp to my feet and a light to my path. Like if we'll stay close to truth, no matter what people are thinking around us, no matter how things may be changing, we can find that solid foundation that helps us know what to do. But then I also think we need to seek wisdom. Let me read to you from James chapter 1. James chapter 1. Did I make that pink noise? John chapter 1, verses 5 and 8. It says, if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given to him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. Isn't that funny? For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Do you see how even God in his word uses the terminology of wind as a thing that shifts around, that causes us to maybe not be so solid in our faith? And I think sometimes it's in these moments that we need to seek God's wisdom and know that he'll give it to us. And then also in Ephesians chapter 4, we want to stay grounded. In the middle of turmoil and in the middle of things that are not going the way we want to, it's really important to stay grounded. My daughter just went off to Freed-Hardeman University, and one of the things I said to her is, look, enjoy your time there, get to know some people, and you're going to be exposed to a lot of different thoughts and mindsets. Keep one foot on the ground at all time, because that stability is really, really important. Your faith is going to guide you through all this. And listen to what Ephesians chapter 4 tells us. Verse 11 and following. Speaking of the church and the unity of it and us coming together as a body of Christ, it says, and he gave the apostles and the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, the teachers, to equip the saints for the work of ministry, for building up the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God. Listen to what it says, to mature manhood, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ, so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro by the waves and carried about, catch it, by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. But rather speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body joined and held together by every joint with that which is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. No matter what you're facing with people in all kinds of different opinions, the stability of the gospel, the stability of truth is going to help you navigate through those winds of change. But then let's talk a little bit about rains. You know, nothing can ruin a good day than a big old rainstorm, right? And I know if you're a farmer, you love rain. I mean, listen, while I'm trying to get my grass to grow, I love a good rain. I can appreciate it. There's no green that comes on my yard until after a good thunderstorm. And you know, the Bible says that God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. And I think we always look at that as thinking, well, it's going to be tough for the good people and the bad people at the same time. But have we ever thought about flipping that the other direction, about the blessings that we find in the midst of rain? You know, he rains on the just as he does the unjust. He provides that goodness for us. So when I think about rain, I think about baseball and getting to the ballpark and warming everybody up, and then boom, the rains fall and it just ruins that day. It just takes us away from what we were hoping to do. So when I think about what God is talking about here in the rains, I think about these kinds of things: aggravation, short-term crisis, adjustments. You know, flexibility is going to be required in those situations. So I think about that, and what do we mean by rains? You know, I think we're talking about things like emotional outbursts. I think we're talking about, you know, times where we have relationship challenges and maybe we lose communication with somebody. During all this past year and a half, I think there were moments where we just lost connection with people because maybe we just said something we shouldn't have, and the person had a bad enough day where they took it a certain way, and maybe we couldn't heal those things. I think relationships can take a beating when we're going through crisis. And so these are some of the things we'll talk about. So when these rain comes, what do? We manage our emotions. Philippians chapter 4. Go with me there if you got your Bibles. Philippians chapter 4. I love this book. It's probably one of my favorite books. I love James and I love Philippians. And I'll tell you why I love Philippians, because I think I need it. I'm not by nature a negative person. I don't think so. But I do think when things get tough, I start feeling like things are cascading out of control. And my family will tell you, when I get in crisis, when I get upset about something, when I get emotional, when I have a bad exchange with somebody, if I said something wrong to somebody that I didn't mean to do and I'm taking a beating for it, I've even asked for forgiveness and gotten all that out of the way, I've tried to do everything in my power to make it right, they'll tell you, I go to my room and I have a nap. And I wake up and I'm a little bit more refreshed. All that clutter is kind of, pushed out. But I think sometimes it's hard for us to manage emotions, and each of us has to find the way that we best do that. Sometimes, Cindy, she's right here, when we first got married, in my household, if we had a challenge, we dealt with it right there, like in the moment. I mean, we were like in each other's faces and all that stuff, okay? With her family, if they had a crisis or some kind of disagreement, they would run to their rooms and close the door. So you can imagine how wonderfully that worked out when we first got married. And we were having our first disagreement, and I'm going, hey, we need to talk about this. She's like, mm-mm. And she's walking out of there. And she goes from, oh, we are not closing the door on this. Oh, no, we are not, And we have those kind of challenges where we're trying to work things through. And what I found out this This doesn't mean be quiet, don't talk to me. This means I need a moment. And when Cindy gets upset, the whole house is cleaned in 5 minutes. Never seen anything like it. And the whole time she's, that kind of thing. And that's her way of coping with that emotion, okay? Mine is different. I need a nap. She needs to clean the whole place up. So if I get a nap and the whole house is clean, man, our world is good, when that finishes up. But managing our emotions. So when I look at the book of Philippians, and I think about how off kilter I get sometimes, and how I struggle to just be positive in my mindset, and I think of Philippians, Paul is in prison, chained in an inner chamber to a guard, and through that he writes these words. And you guys know, like Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I mean, in everything give thanks. And listen to what he says. Rejoice in the Lord always, I say rejoice. Let your reasonableness, and I love this, let your reasonableness, and that's a hard word to say, let that be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Don't be anxious about anything, but in prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. I think there are times where we just need to manage the emotions, to recognize that God's in control, to take a step back, and to let him kind of work. I think too often in the midst of debate or disagreement, I think we find ourselves trying to fix things too much instead of just saying the kind thing that needs to be said and back up and let God work on people's hearts a little bit. So I think this is really good. Manage the emotions in the midst of the rains. And then seek God. Psalm 121. Verses 1 through 8, all of the chapter. It says, I lift up my eyes to the hills. From where does my help come? My help comes from the Lord who made heaven and earth. He will not let your foot be moved. He who keeps you will not slumber. Behold, he who keeps Israel will neither slumber nor sleep. Isn't that awesome to think about a God who doesn't go to sleep? That he's never unattentive to our needs? That's amazing to me. The Lord is your keeper. The Lord is your shade on your right hand. The sun shall not strike you by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord will keep you away from evil. He will keep your life. And the Lord will keep your going out and your coming in from this time forth and forevermore. There is a sense in which, in crisis, we need to seek God and just trust that he's going to be with us through all of it. And then finally, pray for endurance. James chapter 1. We talked about this earlier. We started up in verse 5, but this is the first part of that text in chapter 1, verse 2. When you're going through a difficult circumstance, this is one to read. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet various trials. For you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness. And let steadfastness or endurance have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. And the idea of perfect there doesn't mean that you're sinless. It just means that you're continuing to mature. And so I think too often we are ready to change things, do something, react, respond, when really what we need to do is just let God do his thing. Let God be in control. All right, so the winds and the rains. Let's talk about floods for just a moment. I've never been in a flood, a true flood. But if you've ever seen one, they are catastrophic. If you think about what Katrina did to New Orleans, and you think about all that it did to wreck the world. If you've ever been, forget about floods, but think about tornadoes. I know we've all, in this area of North Alabama, in our area, in the Harvest area, whole neighborhoods were just wiped clean. I know I came through one year going to Maywood Camp and saw what happened down in Hodges and some of those areas, Hackleburg, just the total annihilation. And when that happens, y'all, it's a full crisis. We're talking catastrophic things. We're talking about life-altering. We're talking about things that have residual damage. I mean, some of those places that went through floods, and you go in months later, and there's like a whole wall full of just mold and mildew that was just saturated in there. It has a residual effect. And there's a need for us to rebuild, recover. There's a need for us to kind of reestablish ourselves. And so from a spiritual perspective, just thinking about what this means, floods are things like cancer, the loss of a job, and the promise of none. Things like losing your health altogether, or death. Those are things that are really, really difficult and really, really a challenge for us to overcome. And yet Jesus still says to us that we have to have this foundation, this strength of character, strength of faith that allows us to be able to handle and manage these things. Listen, we've all been touched by cancer. We all know people who have gone through unbelievable difficulties. We know so many people who have lost their loved ones. We have lost loved ones. And we know what a challenge that is. And in the moment, it just seems more than we can physically bear. And I want to just offer a few passages that I think will help us. The first thing is to just remind us that we need to fight doubt. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. You see, when life is really good and easy, that's an easy thing for us to do. I'm just trusting God. He's taking care of me. I just know that God's got this. But when you're in the midst of this kind of flood and the world has been turned upside down, it is much more difficult to read that passage and to say, okay, God's got this. I often say, you don't always know what's on the other side of that horizon, right? As you're driving down the road, you can look back in the rearview mirror and you can see the things that you've passed in life. You can see how God was navigating you through all those things. You can see how God was helping you, putting right people in the right place at the right time to help navigate you through some of these challenges in life. And we just don't know what's on the other side there. But he still says, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him. That means trust in him, place your confidence in God. And it says he will make your path straight. He'll bring it to fruition the way it needs to be. And there are other passages. I won't read all these. Psalm 27, 1 through 14. I won't read all of that. But that's a great text that talks about us trusting in God and putting him as our stronghold, as our refuge, a person that we can just have ultimate confidence in. And then while we're fighting doubt and losing that grip on things, we also need to learn to wait in confidence. Remember Romans 8:28, all things work together for good to those who love the Lord, those who are called according to his purpose. It doesn't always work out exactly like you want it to, but it does mean that God somehow in the midst of this is going to bring something great. Even in the midst of tragedy, sometimes God is right there helping us navigate through it. Isaiah 40 verse 31 says, those who wait on the Lord will mount up with wings like eagles. They'll walk and not be weary. They'll run and not faint. God has the capacity to help us through that. And there are times where I know we think, I can't do anything else. I can't manage one more thing. And God is saying, hey, hang in there. Find that endurance. Psalm 130, verses 5 and 6 says this. Well, I had it. And then I didn't. It says, I wait for the Lord. My soul waits, and in his word I hope. My soul waits for the Lord more than the watchman for the morning, more than the watchman for the morning. Just the confidence that says God is going to bring that sun up today, and I'll sit and I'll wait for him. And no matter what I'm going through, I can just trust that he's going to help me navigate through all that. And then the final thing is, ultimately, we have to find the courage to stand on solid ground. And in Ephesians chapter 6, you guys know this is such a familiar passage, but it talks about putting on the armor of God. And it says that, we are strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. And it says to put on the whole armor of God. And that term whole armor means this impressive array of what God has given us to be equipped to handle the challenges that come our way. And so it says, to put on the helmet of salvation. And it says to have on the belt of truth. And it says to have our feet shod with the preparation of the gospel. And it says to put on the breastplate of righteousness. It says to have the sword of the Spirit in our hand, that's our weapon. That's our ability to fight off things that are going on. But one of the things that I really love that it says here, and it really applies to what we're talking about, is, and take up with you the shield of faith, with which you will be able to quench all the fiery darts of the evil one. Does that escape our mind sometimes? Like my faith, trusting in God, giving my fullness to Him, absolutely no matter what the circumstances are around me, trusting in Him allows me to quench all the fiery darts of the evil one. Like sometimes I think, oh, the devil is so powerful, man, he's just throwing things at me left and right, I just can't handle it. Where is your faith? Because if you have the faith that you should have, you can navigate through all these challenges. And that's not my promise. That's what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7. He who hears these words of mine and does them is like a wise man who builds his house upon the rock. And the winds and the rains and the floods come and they crash upon that house. But it stands. Why? Because it has that solid foundation. And that is the message of Matthew 7:24 through 27. Tonight, and I hope you understand this, this is not a, man, if you need to get yourself right, you come forward tonight. I think probably we could all say, tonight I just need to ask God for deeper faith. Tonight I need to start studying my Bible a little bit deeper and get more fundamentally sound in who I am to the core. So this is not, we don't do invitation songs to embarrass people. We do invitation songs so people who are finding themselves losing their faith or struggling or having a difficult time can come and come forward in a room of people who absolutely love you and who want you to be successful and who want you to be right. And so when we sing these songs, it's not meant to cause shame. It's meant to say, oh, we love you and we're right there with you. There's not a person that can respond alone because there's always someone in the audience who's going through the same thing or something different on a larger scale. So tonight, as we sing this song, come and get the support that you need and know that God is right here with you because He says He's close to the brokenhearted, those who are crushed in spirit. And faith is that victory that helps us overcome the world. So if you need to, respond tonight while we stand and sing.
Hello, my name is Philip Goad, and I'm privileged to serve as the minister here at North Highlands Church of Christ. You may have heard something in today's message that has you asking some questions, wanting to know more about God's Word, and we would be thrilled for the opportunity to study God's Word with you. If you'll reach out to us, we'll be happy to set up a Bible study with you. We'd also invite you to come out and connect with us, worship with us in person. Worship services Sundays are at 9:30 a.m., followed by Bible classes for all ages at 10:45. We also have a midweek Bible study that begins at 6:30 p.m. You can also connect with us via our Facebook page, and that has served many well during the pandemic when they did not feel safe in getting out. On the third Saturday of each month, we have a food bank that's open from 9 to 11 a.m. It is serving Franklin County. And so if you know of anyone who would benefit from coming by to pick up food on the third Saturday, please let them know about this opportunity. It is one of the ways that we serve our community. Again, thank you for watching today, and I hope to connect with you very soon.